Let's get started. So we're doing Wednesday's Tanya, which in the Chayenu is page 63. If you're using the Steinsaltz Tanya, it's page 193. This is for the fourth of Tevis portion. Okay, so we're starting chapter 7, and we just need to know a little bit of how we're getting to this chapter, because it's very easy. Because Tanya is so rich, every chapter has so many ideas. You have to also remember the flow, which a lot of times is easy to forget. The flow we explained in chapter 6 began describing not the divine soul, but the animal soul, the human soul. We don't mean animal in the sense of base, like, animalistic. We mean the human being soul as part of creation. Just like a cow is part of creation, and it's part of the physical world, so too the human is part of the animal king, is part of the creation.
So my animal soul is the same as the animal soul for a cow or a bull or whatever.
No, it's not. It's exactly the point. You're not saying you are an animal inside. We're not saying that. We're saying it shares a trait with the animal.
But
What's
what
an
about
animal?
my nefesh? My nefesh is the same as the nefesh for an animal, I'd say.
We went through this, that nefesh, ruach, neshama are levels of a soul. At a very basic level could be a drive, right? There's an inner drive that pushes you in a certain way. So at the very before you get into like parts, we talk about the inner drive. And we said you basically have two inner drives, which is another way of saying two souls. One soul is a divine soul. It is a godly drive. And then you have another soul called the animal soul. That is, it's about self-maintaining, the ego and the existence. Just like an animal is survival instinct, you too have a drive for self-perpetuation and survival instinct. That's what we mean, the animal soul. We don't mean you're like a dog. We mean the sense that just like
But the same term is used in the Torah. Nefesh is used for human being.
Alan, we had this discussion a few times. I did my best to explain it, and we're going to move on because I can't rehash it. But the basic idea is that the way I understand nefesh, ruach, neshama can exist both in the animal soul world and in the divine soul world, because at least the way I understand nefesh, ruach, neshama is levels of how where the soul is being expressed. Nefesh means the biological expression. Ruach means the emotional expression. Neshama means the intellectual expression. And you can have, what's interesting is you can have all those expressions of soul, right? There's the various ways of being. You can have it based in a divine soul context, and you can have a mirror image, all those levels of intellect, emotions, biological life in the animal soul context. So that's the way I understand it. And but it's not so important to always compare different lexicons, even though you should. But we're trying to understand what Tanya is saying here. How we're going to match it up to other languages and other Torah sources, you can do, but we don't have. It's not necessary to move on, even though I attempted to do it. The point is that the animal soul, we said in chapter 6, is about self-perpetuation. It has a very complex makeup, just like the divine soul has a complex makeup of the 10 spheres. So too, you have the mirror image, the converse. You have the 10 impure emotions and impure intellects, which we have to always understand. When we say impure, we don't mean evil and devious and maniacal. We mean ego. It's very subtle. Ego is a concealment on God. End of story. God's enemy or God's nemesis is ego. Because ego is essentially saying, I exist, when the truth that's covering over that we're all part of God's existence.
Amen.
So the animal soul is really the ego, which is not a bad thing. Ego is necessary to live, for the record. But even at the subtle level, we're not talking a disgusting ego. We're talking just a sense of self and survival instinct and self-perpetuation. That is ego. That is the animal soul. And that was all chapter 6. We though said, where does the ego in the Tanya's lexicon, the animal soul, derive from? She says it comes from klipa. What's klipa? We have to know the term klipa. Klipa is the forces of concealment that God created in this world, so there can be number one, a world that has a sense of identity, not being subsumed in God, and number two, the klipa allows for good and bad. Bad to be What does the word klipa mean? It means a shell. I think the term they use is a husk. So, okay. At the end of chapter 6, it said, however, let's be a little more specific. There are 2 types of klipa. And you're going to see that this is relevant to understand. We're trying to understand, we're not just giving you Kabbalah jargon. We're trying to understand the sense of self, the sense of both, not just the divine soul, but the animal soul inside. It comes from this macrocosmic energy called klipa. But there turns out there's 2 levels of klipa. As he said in the Ezekiel's prophet Ezekiel, he had a vision. And he said there was, what was the expression? A storm wind coming from the north, a great cloud, and fire igniting. And we said those are 3, whirlwinds, whatever, black clouds, representing the 3 utterly impure klipas, from which non-kosher things come from, or sin comes from, things that are not, they're not able easily to express, to become a channel for the divinity. They're too much part of the ego of the world. And then we're going to talk about, however, let's go on. Let's have chapter 7. However, unlike the life forms mentioned in the conclusion of chapter 6 that I just talked about, which are derived from the 3 holy, entirely unclean klipot, the following life forms are derived from klipat noga, which we mentioned briefly. Klipat noga means the glowing husk, the glowing shell. The vitalizing animal soul, by the way, it's an important term. The animal soul is what we call it, but it's also, really has 2 names. The life-giving animal soul, which means the biological, not just the biological, the whatever gives you life in a body and in your ego, that's what we're talking about. The vitalizing animal soul in the Jew, which is derived from the side of klipa, and which clothes itself in the human being's blood, as stated above, this metaphysical life force, and the soul of the animals, beasts, birds, and fish, which are pure and are thus permitted for Jewish consumption, as also the existence and vitality of everything inanimate in the vegetable world that is permissible for consumption. And so too, next page, the existence and vitality of every act, utterance, and thought in mundane manners that contain no forbidden aspect, being neither root nor branch of the 365 prohibited precepts, the negative commandments, and their offshoots, prohibited either by the explicit authority of the Torah or by rabbinic enactment. So we just said, what is this fourth, this other type of concealment energy in the world? Klipat noga, a glowing husk. Just to give you an example, in the some fruits have two shells or two peels. One is more edible, and then there's like an outer one that's like inedible. So that's a good analogy.
What are you referring to?
Just to give an example in the Steinsaltz Tanya, it just says there's certain fruits that have. I don't. I'm not a farmer, but a lot of times when we see a peel, there's really sometimes a peel, like a shell on top of the peel. Look it up on ChatGPT. Peel in the rind. So a peel, a lot of times like an orange peel. You can eat an orange peel, right? People make candy out of it. But there's sometimes the outer shell, not of an orange, but other, let's say, nuts or stuff, is inedible. So the outer shell would be kind of akin to the three totally unclean klipot. They're not. There's always good in everything. For the record, even since it's impure, has this godly spark. It couldn't exist otherwise. Mm-hmm. The question is it directly redeemable? To reveal, can it be directly redeemed to transcend itself? Understand? The answer is,
I don't know what you mean directly redeemable.
Can you eat a ham sandwich and have in mind you're going to study Torah with the energy of the ham sandwich? Are you redeeming the energy in the ham? We're going to talk about it later. But just the basic thing is you can't, a sin, God said it's very interesting. You think about it, there's no way a creation can transcend itself. There's no way. Why is there no way? Because you're finite. However, God, who wanted a relationship with creation, with humanity, God says, I, infinite, and not just infinite, beyond any limits, I'm going to make pathways to connect. Wow. Which only can come from God, because God is truly unlimited to make those pathways that are really not logical for the finite to connect, the finite human to connect to the infinite God, but God chose the human being and gave those pathways. That's what the mitzvahs are. Right. So there's 248 pathways to connect, to fuse, to bridge the finite and the infinite. At the same time, there's 365 negative mitzvahs, prohibitions, where God says those things you can't redeem. You're not. You have the best of intentions with a ham sandwich. It's not going to help. You can't connect to me this way. That ham sandwich is too, for whatever reason, God wanted that not to be directly redeemable. It doesn't mean it doesn't have any good in it, but you're not going to make a godly revelation through engaging with it. Versus a kosher hamburger, you could make a godly revelation. We're going to talk about how that happens. But anyways, just to move along, anything that's kosher doesn't mean it's holy. It just means it's not trapped in obscuring the divine.
What is that? It's not trapped in obscuring?
Everything that is permitted in this world, which by the way is the majority of things in this world. You think about it, most things are usable for a divine, for a mitzvah. So most things are usable to be connecting to God in some way or another. However, that doesn't mean that they are connected to God already. Instead, just because kosher meat can be a way to connect to God doesn't mean now it's revealing God. And he says now, yet, let's continue on the third paragraph. Yet, when these permitted thoughts, utterance, or acts are not performed for the sake of heaven, as they ought to be, instead, right, kosher food or mundane leisure activities, whatever. Instead, or eating and drinking is part of eating bread. Is like you got to survive. It doesn't mean that it's becoming a revelation of God in the act of eating. So when you don't eat, even kosher, modest food, instead you're doing it to serve the will, desire, and lust of the body. Let's say you have a lot of fancy steak. It's just to indulge. But even here's the thing: even when it's a need of the body and necessary for its very preservation of life, like bread and water, kosher bread and water. So you can't fault the person from wanting to eat bread and water to survive. It's not like indulgent; it's just survival. But his intention with, let's say, the bread and water, we're talking the most bare bones, is not for the sake of heaven, i.e., to utilize his body as an instrument in the service of God. You're just enjoying being revived a cold glass of water and having your hunger stilled by a dry crust of bread, which is just normal. It's just a human being. You need that to survive. But because the kavanah, the spiritual intent is absent, then all these acts, utterances, and thoughts are no better than the vitalizing animal soul itself. As we said earlier,
no better than what? I didn't hear you.
The vitalizing animal soul, the metaphysical drive that gives you life. Again, is it bad to be alive? No, God made you alive. But can you say that the vitalizing animal soul, the one that gives you life, your life force, as you want to call nefesh, let's say, right? It is not God. It is a separate entity feeling I have to survive. And that, as innocuous as that sounds, is not connecting to God. It's feeling of self. And that comes, as we said earlier, that comes from the klipat noga, this shell that covers God, but it's a translucent shell. Meaning it's not a shell, let's see the words. All these acts are no better than the vitalizing animal soul itself. And everything in this totality of things, meaning the animal soul with its actions, utterance, and thoughts, flows and is drawn from the second level, the second gradation of klipot and sitra achra, which is the fourth klipa, called klipat.
You're saying that everything has to have the intention to fulfill something that God has commanded.
Exactly. So going back to the terminology we're getting from the 3 and the 1, the 3 and the number 4, the 3 klipot that Ezekiel saw in his vision, the storm cloud, the black cloud, or the fiery something, all representative of the impure energy that exists in the world. But then he saw a fourth one. He saw a klipa noga, a klipa that shines. What's a klipa that? How could a cover illuminate? Because that means in this fourth level or this other category of source energy, on one hand, it gives existence to things. That's a concealment from God. At the same time, you can see the glimmer of possible divine light in there. And that's what's called a klipa.
Helped us get out of Egypt.
For in this world, called the world of Asiya, the world of action, the physical world, most, and even indeed almost all of the klipa noga, the energy of this world, is evil. When we say evil, that it obscures on God, with only a little good intermingled with it. Just an interesting point, I didn't know this till today, from reading the Steinsaltz Tanya and here, that klipat noga, it sounds to me like klipa is another expression of tzimtzum, right? Tzimtzum, which is the Kabbalah big idea about God contracting and hiding self, God's essence. Klipa is kind of a manifestation of that, right? Mm-hmm. So in order to have what do you call it? A world, you need to have contraction of God's overwhelming presence. The question is how much do you contract God's presence? Do you totally obscure it, or do you partially? And the reality is it's always going to be partial, because you totally hide God, can't exist. But in the higher worlds, the obscurity is less. It's like a ratio, right? In Atzilut, there's got to be a little bit of klipa because it has to have a sense of self, but it's very minimal. And what's overwhelming is the glimmering divine light. In the next world, it's less light and more obscurity. Here, it's vast majorities obscurity. Vast majority of the energy of this world is covering over God, and only a little bit of glimmer if you work really hard, you can pierce the shell and you can find the divine within everything.
Rabbi,
Yes.
a little while ago, I didn't want to interrupt. You said separate. Nothing's separate from God, right?
Feels separate. Feels separate.
Go.
Continuing on, from this minute amount of good within Klipat Noga comes the good qualities which are found in the animal soul of the Jew as explained above. Again, we said earlier, very interesting. This I love. Here's a great analogy I read in the Steinsaltz sidebar. We said in the end of chapter 1, we said an interesting idea that this vitalizing animal soul that makes us survive and exist, it's not bad. It's just part of. It's just an element of creation that wants to exist. And because we're saying it comes from Klipat Noga, then because we're saying it comes from Klipat Noga, that means there's always going to be good, even in the sense of ego, there's glimmers of goodness. So the traits that the Talmud says the Jewish people have, a lot of kindness and whatever, those aren't necessarily holy traits. They're just part of the, how are you? Rabbi who? I think he went to the library. Down there. So as I was saying, so the good traits that Jewish people have, like modesty and kindness, that's not necessarily holy. And here's a fantastic analogy. It says in the Talmud that a human being could have learned certain good traits from animals. If the Talmud in Eruvin 106b says that we could have learned certain positive traits like modesty from a cat and respect for other people's property from ants. I guess they don't steal, and so on. Now, the animals that are doing modesty, the cat isn't thinking about there's a God and I should be humble and I should be modest. They're just doing it naturally. So to the ant isn't stealing out of a moral decision. The ant is doing it out of this is what it's programmed to do. So too, that's a famous thing. This is really close to this. Raccoons seem to wash their hands before eating. It's like a natilat yadayim. Is the raccoon washing their hands before eating like we do? You could learn natilat yadayim from the raccoon, but they're obviously not doing it like we're doing natilat yadayim. In other words, we have certain just inborn traits that are part of our makeup, of coming from our animal soul, coming from Klipat Noga. Okay. Now, Klipat Noga is an intermediate category between the three completely unclean Klipot and the category in order of sanctity. So interesting, this Klipat, no, so we have three categories now. Not really categories. It didn't say there's a third category. There's just a level between holiness and the three impure klipot. It didn't say that it's that there's this state of being in between. In other words, it's not really a third level, but it's just a state of possibility in between holy and impure. Hence, this energy, which our animal soul comes from, which our kosher food comes from, and all that, it's sometimes absorbed within the three unclean klipot, as explained in Eitz Chaim, Portal 49, beginning of chapter 4, citing the Zohar. And other times it is absorbed and elevated to the category and level of sanctity. In other words, holiness. That is, the energy of certain things, like our animal soul or kosher food, can be absorbed into holiness when the good that is intermingled in it is extracted from the evil, prevails over it, and ascends to be absorbed and incorporated into holiness, to sanctity. That's very practical. For instance, if one eats fat beef, they say marbled beef, good marbled beef, and spiced wine, but not out of physical desire, but rather because having this food broadens your mind for the service of God and of God's Torah.
Right.
As Rava, the great sage Rava said, wine and fragrance makes my mind more receptive.
Wow.
Or, for example, to fulfill the commit, you get good meat and wine to fulfill the commandment to enjoy the Shabbat and the festivals. Next page, 66. When one eats and drinks in the above mentioned manner, then the vitality of the meat and the wine, which originated in Klipat Noga, because remember, everything kosher comes from Klipat Noga, the glimmering husk, the glimmering shell. But you're taking the glimmer, the good in it, and you're extracting it from the bad, the concealment, and it's ascending to God like a burnt offering and a sacrifice.
Wow.
So that's an example with action. You take a mundane thing, good meat and wine, and you're able, through your intention is the key. Your intention determines, is this become a godly revelation, holiness, or not? So too concerning speech. Gives an example. That was an example of action, but now we're talking about speech. A person who makes a humorous remark to sharpen his mind and make his heart rejoice in God and his Torah and service, which should be practiced joyfully. We know in Chassidus, coming from the Arizal, just doing the mitzvahs alone is not enough. It has to be done with joy. Joy is a way of really revealing the godliness in the mitzvah. So joy is very, very important. So if someone, before they study, or they make a kosher joke to lighten and bring joy, and that makes the person, let's say, more able to study, then that joke, which is kind of very mundane, became now holy.
Wow.
As again, Rava.
Isn't joy a mitzvah in itself, though? I believe it is.
Yes. But we're saying in addition to that, it's a mitzvah in itself. I don't know if joy is one of the 613.
Yes, I think it is. I believe it is. I've read it enough times in Deuteronomy to infer it itself, at least.
Again, the 613 is the canonized mitzvahs that the Rambam and others picked out of all the verses. Not every command. I'm not arguing with you. I don't know if it's one of the 613 in the Rambam. It doesn't mean it's not a mitzvah, though. It's still a mitzvah. The question we're pointing out is here's the point, is that it's joy is actually very, very pervasive in every mitzvah. It's not like one of the mitzvahs. It's actually an ingredient that has to go along with every single mitzvah. Why? Because that's the way you cannot find God in gloom.
Well, it's the first mitzvah after the Shema. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart.
Love and joy is different. But I don't want to get caught up in semantics. Yes, it's a mitzvah. And yes, it's a mitzvah. It's such an important mitzvah. Every other mitzvah, like tefillin and mezuzah, has to have joy as an accompaniment to really become a revealed connection to God.
Joy is an emotion, and that's part of the heart.
Okay. Rava, we see Rava was wont to do with his pupils He gave a class. He prefaced his discourse with a humorous remark, whereupon the students became cheerful and more receptive to understand his lesson. So we see Rava gave us an example of where you can take mundane action, like eating and drinking, of good meat and wine, and you can, with intention, to use it for better Torah and mitzvahs, it now becomes elevated to become holy.
Okay.
The meat and the eating, the act of eating and drinking, very base things, now become holy because they're utilized as a means to the mitzvahs. So too in jokes, if jokes are helping the person and the students understand the material better, it becomes elevated as holy now, holy jokes. So the bottom line of today is like this, that intention is very important to achieve union with God. You could do kosher things, but if you're not having the intention to utilize it as a holistic system to get closer to God, eating and drinking to have a health, to do mitzvahs, or saying a joke in order to understand the material better, if you're not having the intention, it will not become unified with God in an open way. Until later you do teshuvah, and then you can retroactively redeem it. But just doing a kosher lifestyle, so to speak, in of itself will not achieve the purpose of our existence, which is to achieve open union with God, open reunion with God. You have to have intention.
Well, that's the commandment to love God with all your heart. It's exactly that in English.
Very good. So everything has to have intention. And that is the lesson and the takeaway of today's